I lived in a world of my own making, carefully constructed like a kid building a Lego castle. In this world, all the pieces fit. There was a small one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, bought on a mortgage I paid with my salary as a design engineer. There was an old but reliable Ford Focus. We drove to my mom's place on weekends. There were dinners I cooked after work because Helen was tired from her job at the hair salon, cutting and coloring other people's hair, absorbing the smells of hairspray and other people's gossip. I thought this was the adult life you read about in pictureless books, reliable, predictable, like a commuter train schedule. Helen was the light in my orderly world. She'd burst into the apartment like a gust of wind, bringing the smell of the street, her perfume, and something indefinably festive. She might crave ice cream at 3 a.m. and I'd grumble for show, then get dressed and head to the 24-hour convenience store. She laughed in a way that warmed me right around my solar plexus. I loved her with a calm, solid love, like the ground under your feet or the morning sun. It was a given, an unshakable constant in my life's equations. The problem was Helen didn't seem to want to be a constant. She wanted to be a variable, an unknown quantity. Vance appeared in her life as suddenly as a thunderstorm on a clear July day. He came into the salon for a haircut. Then he came back with a huge bouquet of roses that made all the stylists gasp, while Helen blushed, flustered. He was nothing like me, at all. If I was a blueprint drawn to spec, he was a charcoal sketch dashed off on a napkin in a fancy restaurant. He had a small business, something vague about crypto investments. He wore expensive watches, smelled of cologne that cost half my salary, and talked about the future like it was already in his suit pocket. I saw him a couple of times when he dropped Helen off. He looked down on me, even though he was shorter. It was the look of a man who knew some cosmic secret you didn't. The secret apparently was how to make money from thin air and charm women like Helen. Our breakup wasn't a scandal. It was quiet, like an autumn leaf falling. We sat in our little kitchen, drinking lukewarm tea. Helen looked at her hands on the table and spoke words that hurt worse than any scream. "Chris, you have to understand. It's good with you. Calm, reliable. But it's like living in a museum. Everything's correct. Everything's in its place. But it's dusty and boring. I want life. You know? Real life. Something that takes your breath away." I didn't understand. What could be more real than a mortgage, a job, and vacation plans to Miami? What could be more real than dinner you cooked for the woman you love? "With Vance, everything's different," she continued, not looking up. "He burns bright. And being near him, I start to burn too. We're going to Bali. He wants to start some project there. He says I'm his muse. His muse." I looked at her, my Helen, who just 2 days ago asked me to fix the leaky faucet and couldn't reconcile her with that pretentious word. Muse to a crypto guy. It sounded like a bad joke, but I wasn't laughing. She packed her things in one evening, 2 suitcases and a box of cosmetics. The apartment instantly felt empty and hollow. The scent of her perfume faded in a couple of days. All that was left was my world, my Lego castle, missing its brightest, most crucial piece. The first 6 months were hell, a quiet, domestic, exhausting hell. I came home from work to an empty apartment, mechanically cooked dinner for one, stared at the ceiling. On weekends I drove to my mom's. She'd look at me with profound sadness in her eyes and try to feed me pie, as if it held a cure for heartbreak. "It's okay, honey," she'd say. "You'll find someone else. A nice, simple girl. Not that flighty thing." I stayed silent. I didn't think Helen was flighty. I thought I was a failure who couldn't give his woman life. Social media told me they'd actually gone to Bali. The pictures looked like they were from a travel brochure. Ocean, palm trees, Helen in a flowing dress, Vance with a smug smile. Then came a picture with a rounded belly, then one with a baby in her arms, a boy. The caption read, "Our new world, our everything. Thank you, love, for this miracle." Every post felt like a punch to the gut. I looked at their glossy Photoshop life and compared it to mine. My life was grey. Work home, occasional meetups with friends who pitied me and bad-mouthed Helen. I started working more, taking projects home, buried myself in blueprints and calculations so there was no room for thoughts. Slowly the mortgage shrank. I renovated the apartment, replaced the wallpaper Helen and I had chosen together, threw out the old couch where we'd watched movies. I tried to erase her traces, but they weren't on the walls, they were inside me. A year passed, then 18 months. The pain dulled. It became an ache, a scar that only throbbed when it rained or when our song played on the radio. I got used to living alone. I even started to like it. No one left lotion bottles scattered around the bathroom. No one demanded ice cream at 3 a.m. The silence didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt cozy. I bought a good record player and started listening to vinyl. By day, I was Chris Anderson, engineer. By evening, I became a guy who listened to old jazz and read books he'd long put off. I almost stopped checking her profile. Their Bali life, it seemed, had ended. The latest pictures were back in our city. Vance had apparently started some new startup here. Helen had gone from muse to mommy. The pictures changed. No more palm trees and ocean. Just playgrounds, daycare recitals, birthday cakes. Helen's face changed too. The carefree lightness was gone. Tiredness gathered at the corners of her eyes, unfiltered. Then 2 years after our split, it happened. A Saturday. A grey, chilly November Saturday. I drove to the big mall to buy a new drill. The old one broke, and I needed to hang a bookshelf. My book collection was growing. The mall buzzed like a disturbed hive. People, music, ads blaring from huge screens, the smell of food court fare. I walked through this Babylon, thinking only about Watts and Torque, when my gaze snagged on a familiar figure by the window of a kid's store. It was her, Helen. She wasn't in a flowing dress. She wore an ordinary nylon jacket, slightly too big, jeans and sneakers. Hair once perfectly styled was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She stood staring at some ridiculous plush toy. But it wasn't the clothes, it was her expression. The tiredness I'd seen in photos was deeper in person. She looked like someone who'd been running a long time and finally stopped, not because they reached the finish line, but because they had no strength left. Beside her stood Vance. He wasn't looking at the window display. He was glued to his phone, thumb tapping rapidly. His face was irritated. The expensive cologne seemed replaced by the smell of stress and nerves. In the stroller, he impatiently rocked with his foot. A child whimpered. A little boy in a blue beanie. I could have walked past. Pretended I didn't see them, but something made me stop. I stood about 30 feet away behind a pillar, watching the real life she'd left me for. Vance snapped something at Helen without looking up from his phone. She flinched, turned to him, said something quietly back. He waved a hand dismissively towards the food court. She nodded obediently, took the stroller handle, and pushed it towards the escalator. Vance walked beside her, still staring at his screen. That's when our eyes met. I don't know how she recognized me. I'd changed, put on a little weight, grown a short beard, wore glasses I'd started using 6 months ago. But she knew. Helen froze, literally rooted to the tiled floor amidst the scurrying, buzzing anthill. The stroller rolled back an inch. She caught it automatically. Her eyes widened. They held everything at once: surprise, fear, shame, and something else. Something like longing. As if she'd seen a ghost from a past life, from that museum life that was calm and reliable. Vance, oblivious, walked ahead but turned when he felt her lag. "Why'd you stop?" he asked irritably. He followed her gaze and saw me. His face was blank, empty. He didn't seem to recognize me at first. When he did, there was no superiority, no mockery in his eyes like 2 years ago, just mild annoyance and frustration. I was an obstacle in his path, like a badly parked shopping cart. We looked at each other for a few seconds. Those seconds held a lifetime. I saw her tired, faded, with an irritable husband and a crying child. She saw me calm, alone, in a good coat, casually shopping for a drill on a Saturday. In her look, I read the silent question. "How are you?" Or maybe it was a different question. Why do you look so whole?" I gave a slight nod, just a polite, meaningless nod to an old acquaintance. No gloating, no resentment. Surprisingly, in that moment I felt nothing but release. Like a heavy stone I'd carried inside for 2 years had simply dissolved. I saw not a goddess who'd escaped to paradise, but an ordinary woman who'd traded one cage for another, slightly more gilded, but just as confining. Her burning man was just a stressed-out guy glued to his smartphone. Her real life consisted of the same mundane chores, just seasoned with a crying baby and a husband's irritation. She looked away first, muttered something to Vance, and they hurried towards the escalator, almost fleeing. I stayed by the pillar. I wasn't thinking about drills anymore. I thought about how strangely life works. A person runs from quiet in search of fireworks, only to find smoke and the smell of ashes. I thought about my quiet apartment, the stack of new books on my table, the Miles Davis record waiting on the turntable. And for the first time in 2 years I understood that my museum life wasn't a flaw. It was my choice, my fortress, my right to peace. I turned and walked out without buying the drill. I didn't need it anymore. The bookshelf could wait until tomorrow. Today, for some reason, I just wanted to go home, brew good tea, and listen to jazz. In complete, resonant, precious silence. The drive home from the mall felt surprisingly light, as if an invisible burden I'd carried on my shoulders for 2 years had simply evaporated in the mall's hollow space, dissolved among the smells of popcorn and strangers' perfumes. I drove, and for the first time in a long while, the grey November landscape outside didn't bring melancholy. It seemed just a backdrop, a neutral setting to my inner liberation. I had won. Not Helen, not Vance. I had conquered my past. I turned the page. My apartment greeted me with its familiar, precious silence. I shrugged off my coat, walked into the living room, and my gaze fell on the uninstalled bookshelf. I hadn't bought the drill, but it no longer seemed important. All in good time. I put on the Miles Davis record, and the first notes of the trumpet flowed into the room like thick honey, filling the space with harmony. I brewed myself expensive tea I'd bought last week with cornflower petals and bergamot. Sat in my favorite armchair, stretched out my legs, and closed my eyes. This was it. My kingdom. My fortress. My hard-earned, hard-won nirvana. I thought about Helen, but distantly now, like a surgeon thinks about a removed tumor. With a certain professional interest but no personal involvement, her faded eyes, her tired face, her stressed-out husband glued to his phone. This wasn't her tragedy. It was just the predictable finale of chasing glitter. She'd traded reliability for fireworks and now lived among the cooled, smoldering remains. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel smug. I felt nothing, and this nothing felt like the pinnacle of mental health. The evening was perfect. Music, a good book, thoughts flowing smoothly. I went to sleep with a deep sense of satisfaction. And then something went wrong. Waking up was sharp, like a blow. In the middle of the night, I woke up in a cold sweat. I dreamed of her. Helen. Not the tired one from the mall, but the old one. The one who laughed with her head thrown back and demanded ice cream at 3 a.m. In the dream she looked at me accusingly and said, "You left me." Not she left me, but I left her. Nonsense. Absurd. But my heart pounded like a trapped bird. I got up, drank water. The apartment's silence suddenly felt not cozy, but ringing, oppressive. The Miles Davis music, balm just yesterday, now sounded false, like the soundtrack to someone else's fabricated life. I went to the window. The night city blinked with indifferent lights, and I suddenly felt incredibly, piercingly alone. Not solitary, as I like to think, but truly alone, like the last person on earth. The fortress had cracked. The next morning I couldn't focus on work. Blueprints blurred before my eyes. Numbers and calculations seemed like meaningless symbols. Instead, her face filled my head, tired, with that silent question in her eyes. I tried to push the image away, busy myself, but it kept returning like a persistent fly. My calm, my harmony, which I'd been so proud of yesterday, crumbled to dust from a single memory. That evening, breaking my own 2-year taboo, I went to her social media page. My hands shook like a teenager's. I stared greedily at the photos. There she was with her son on a playground, a strained smile, tired eyes. There they were with Vance in some restaurant, he looking at his phone, she pushing salad around with her fork. The glossy cover was cracking at the seams, revealing an ugly truth beneath. Debts, arguments, disappointment. I scrolled further and further, diving into someone else's life like a diver into murky water. I was looking for confirmation of my rightness, my superiority. And I found it. But instead of satisfaction, I only felt growing anxiety. A week passed like this. My life became a ritual of self-deception. By day, I pretended to be the same calm, self-sufficient Chris Anderson. At night, like a thief, I crept into her life through the laptop screen, feeding my pain and my strange, sick dependence on her unhappiness. My silence became torture. My books looked at me accusingly. My jazz seemed like mockery. I realized I wasn't healed. I'd just locked my sickness in the deepest cell of my soul, and the chance encounter had broken the lock. The climax of this quiet madness came on Saturday. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Mom always called first. Friends did too. I looked through the peephole and froze. Vance was standing on the doorstep. He was alone. No Helen. No stroller. He looked bad. His expensive coat was rumpled, his perfect hair was disheveled, dark circles shadowed his eyes. He smelled not of elite cologne, but of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. The master of life look was gone, replaced by the hunted look of a man cornered. I silently opened the door. "Can I?" he rasped. I nodded, stepping back into the apartment. He walked in, glancing around uncertainly. My clean, orderly apartment seemed to affect him like a spaceship would a caveman. "It's peaceful here," he said, and the word held all his envy and all his longing. "Tea? Coffee?" I asked mechanically, just to say something. "Vodka." He smirked crookedly, but then caught my look and added, "Coffee, please." While I fussed with the coffee maker in the kitchen, he wandered into the living room and stopped by the record player. "Is that Miles Davis?" he asked. I was surprised. "Yeah. Helen said you listened to jazz. She hated it. Called it funeral music." I stayed silent, setting a cup of coffee in front of him. He sat in the armchair, my armchair. It was the height of irony. The predator who stole my mate now sat in my den, pathetic and defeated. "I don't know why I came," he began, staring into the cup. "Guess I just got nowhere else to go." He talked for a long time, disjointedly, jumping from one thing to another. It was the stream of consciousness of a man on the edge. He told me everything. About the failed Bali project, about debts that snowballed, about creditors who'd stopped threatening and started acting, slashing his car tires last Tuesday, about his father refusing to give him money, about Helen constantly crying and blaming him for everything. "She looks at me like I'm nothing," he said, his voice trembling. "Says I ruined her life. That it was better with you. Calmer. You get it? She says it was better with you." He looked up at me, and there was no hatred in his eyes. There was pleading. He was seeking sympathy, understanding, maybe even forgiveness from me, his vanquished rival. "She idealizes you," he continued. "Talks about you to our son. Says, Mommy had a friend, Uncle Chris. He wouldn't have done that. She wants to leave me, go to her parents, and I can't be without her, or without Mikey. I love them, honestly. I just screwed it all up. Thought I had life by the tail. Turned out it was just a dead cat." He buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. The successful crypto businessman, alpha male, human firework, sat in my chair and cried like a hurt child. My fortress hadn't just cracked. It had collapsed. All my ideas about the world, about winning and losing, about fairness, everything crumbled to dust. I looked at him and felt nothing. No schadenfreude, no satisfaction, no pity. I felt emptiness. A vast, scorched emptiness. For 2 years I'd built my life as his antithesis. I was calm, he burned bright. I was reliable, he was a fraud. I was the winner because I'd found peace, he was the loser mired in chaos. Turns out we were just two sides of the same counterfeit coin, both unhappy, lost men who never figured out what real life was. "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked when he'd calmed a little. He raised his red, swollen eyes to me. "Talk to her." I froze. "What?" "Talk to Helen. Convince her not to leave. Tell her I'm not all bad, that I'll fix things. She'll listen to you. You're an authority to her now. The ideal, that museum she wants to go back to. Tell her your museum is closed, that there's no place for her. Maybe then she'll stop looking back and give me a chance." One last chance. This was the finale. Absurd. Unbelievable. He was asking me, the man he'd taken everything from, to save his family, save him from the consequences of his own actions. He wanted me to be his advocate with the woman we'd both loved. I looked at him. This broken man in my chair, looked at my apartment, suddenly alien and cold, at the Miles Davis record frozen on the turntable. I thought about how my quiet, ordered life had ended the moment I opened the door to him. He'd brought his chaos, his pain, his drama into my fortress. And now that chaos was mine, I didn't know what to say. Any answer would be wrong. I stayed silent, and in that silence, broken only by his sniffles, I understood with terrifying clarity that my story with Helen hadn't ended in the mall. It hadn't even ended now. It was only just beginning, and the ending wouldn't be anything like I'd imagined.